Hi everyone, and welcome to the Fake Love and Flying Monkeys podcast. My name's Nova Gibson and I am your host. My area of expertise is in supporting victims and survivors of narcissistic abuse and other toxic relationships. I'm the principal counsellor at Brighter Outlook Narcissistic Abuse Counselling Service, and I'm also the author of Fake Love, Understanding and Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about everything from the initial pink cloud you find yourself on at the start, through to the horrific discard and the powerful trauma bond that keeps you hooked. So take your imaginary seat on the roller coaster that is narcissistic abuse, and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode of Fake Love and Flying Monkeys. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fake Love and Flying Monkeys. Today I have another very special guest with me once again, who's from the other side of the world. Well, other side of the world for me here in Oz. And today I am lucky enough to have the lovely Dr. Christine Marie Cocchiola. Now, with my Australian accent, I really hope that I pronounced that correctly. Now, Dr. Christine, I'm so excited to have her here. She is a coercive control educator, a researcher, and a survivor as well of domestic violence, coercive control, narcissistic abuse. She is also a tenured college professor teaching social work for the last 20 years and has been a social justice advocate since the age of 19. Volunteering for a local domestic violence SA agency, she supports protective parents in strategizing how best to navigate the family court system, including divorce proceedings and custody arrangements. But most importantly, Dr. Cocchiola is a protective parent, and through her own clinical expertise, research, and personal experiences, she understands, if anyone, the impact that coercive control has on children. Welcome, Dr. Christine. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
My pleasure. Now, Christine, please tell us about your practice. But if that's okay, I'd really love to know what brought about your passion, or you choosing to, I guess, have this area of expertise, and why you support victims of coercive control in such an amazing and supportive way. Tell us about you.
Absolutely. I love to tell people a little bit about my story because I think it really sheds light on the fact that this abuse can happen to anyone. Yeah. So I began this work at 19. I was very interested in preventing child abuse and sexual abuse and domestic abuse. And I became a volunteer where I volunteered for over 35 years for the same agency. And I became a child welfare social worker, went to school and got my MSW, became an educator, and am a college professor teaching social work every semester on the power and control wheel. And I didn't know it was happening to me. And that's really, I think, I feel like if it can happen to someone teaching in the field, advocating, and working alongside victims and survivors very frequently. I'm a therapist, and I didn't know it was happening to me. And the important part about that is that, as you know, coercive control, it can be physical. It's certainly, when it becomes physical, it's the most deadly. But oftentimes, it's not characterized by physical violence. It's characterized by insidious, nuanced pattern behavior that diminishes an individual. You talk about this in your book, this amazing, concept that is so hard to wrap our head around, where it's someone who literally intentionally tries to rob our personality from us. I think those are the words you use.
Yeah, dismantle our personality and turn us into this person we don't recognize, so that we're easier to manipulate and abuse. Yeah,
absolutely. So that's my background, and so I didn't know. I've always been a social justice advocate since I was very young, but I didn't know that I actually was going to have to be a social justice advocate for myself. I didn't
Yeah.
know I was going to have to be a social justice advocate for my children. And so
Mhm.
then this work turned into, oh my gosh, if this is happening to me, how many other people is it happening to? And then how many other children does this continue to happen to when they're living in a family system with a perpetrator? It's never the adult victim's fault, but how do we help these children? So my work has become really focused from a psychological perspective. What happens to children's brains, to their development, and how are they harmed by living in the same home with a coercive controller or sharing custodial time with a coercive controller or narcissistic abuser?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Just so needed, because children's brains are forming, aren't they? When most of the abuse that is not only going to impact them, but also the victim parent, for years and years to come, the real damage is being done in those really early years, perhaps when the victim's still with the abuser, because the child is being role modeled all of these behaviors to them, and it's not necessarily the abuser that they're seeing or hearing screaming and shouting. It can be the true victim parent, which can be so confusing. So tell us about how you support people, and tell us about what they're going through when they come to see you.
Yeah, so I wanted, if I can just go back, because your point is so valid. I believe these abusers, when they meet us, I have a podcast called Perfect Prey, because I believe they choose their victims, and they choose people who are going to be more giving and empathic, perhaps, and certainly loyal and forgiving. But in that, what happens is, we think these people, we're like, who is he? He's a monster. How did he become, or she become, this monster? The reality is they've always been a monster. We just didn't see it. And they've been this way with our children since day one. Once they realized how important the children were or are to that protective parent, they know,
They
how
become a
do I get
weapon, don't they? Yeah.
Yes, from
Mm.
day one. And even if it's not overtly weaponized, even if it's a more covert weaponization, like, you talk about your person in your book, Sophie, and when she goes on medication because she's super dysregulated and overwhelmed, right? And she goes
Yeah.
on medication, and then this guy, Justin, talks about her being on pills, right? And how he uses that against her. And that's what abusers do, right? And so I try to help protective parents. First of all, oftentimes the first step from a clinical perspective, a lot of people say, you should do DBT or neurofeedback or EMDR. None of that is it may help a little bit, but none of that is going to be a significant help until someone actually is able to wrap their head around the fact that someone could be this harmful. It's like a radical acceptance.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that
It's
person is an abuser, period. And
absolutely.
now how do
And
I
it's
navigate that? Yeah.
it's so hard to find anyone like you who will be able to get that across. And of course you do. That's your gift, because the victim parent, or the victim, the new target, is seeing such different people in this person. Perhaps it's the new target, and they're starting to get abused, but they're seeing the parent who's abusing them being so loving to their children. Well, they can't be all bad because they're loving on their children so much. So it just creates such confusion and cognitive dissonance, doesn't it? So, this is where we need you, Christine.
Yeah, it's so hard to really have these challenging conversations with someone who's so traumatized, to really support their ability to break the trauma bond. Really, that's what we're talking about, right? Is to break this trauma bond that they have. And, it's a protective factor for them. They don't want to let go of that trauma bond. But that is truly something that we call radical acceptance. And once that happens, there is an empowerment. Like, there is a really significant, like, wait a minute, if he is or she is this bad, I can probably now, if I'm able to acknowledge that, I can possibly predict what might happen next. And if I can predict it, I call it the 3 Ps. If I can predict how this person's going to behave, I can better prepare. Which means, to your point about like victims behaving in ways that are dysregulated and overwhelmed, well, if you know that when your partner comes home, the first thing they're going to do is accuse you of maybe not making a good dinner or of not depositing all of the money the way you should have in the account, whatever their narrative is. If you predict that might happen, you're going to be better prepared to respond and therefore better able to protect yourself. And that's huge.
Respond or not respond.
Well, to the point, what is that response exactly?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it nothing?
So, Christine, how do you get people to that point where, that's for my clients, that seems to be the overwhelming light at the end of the tunnel that they just can't get to, which is that point of radical acceptance. And they're like, how long does it take, Nova? It's been 2 weeks, it's been 6 months. When is it, when am I going to feel better? How do you get them to that point?
Well, I think that first of all, it's about, unfortunately, it may mean trauma, like almost traumatizing ourselves. We have to actually keep a list. And we know that, the brain and the motor skills, the cognitive processing and motor skills is very helpful. If you actually keep a real list, like a journal, and you write down all of the horrible things the person did, right? And then you write down maybe the nice things and you ask yourself, what was the modus operandi for the nice things? You start to actually really pull apart, why did they do that nice thing? What did they want from me? Did they want sex? Did they want, a nice meal? Did they want to make sure we performed in front of our relatives in a nice way? And so the more that we sadly expose ourselves, exposure therapy does work. The more you expose yourself, the more the reality sticks. And I can tell you, a couple of years after I left my ex, I was still going back and watching horrifying audio videos that I had taken to just be like, wait a minute, I'm not crazy, right? I mean, I don't need to do that anymore, but I did for a long period of time. And so that feels really toxic and traumatizing to someone who's already a trauma victim. But it's almost like we have to decide, is that a better option than going back, being, as you call it, hoovered back in, right?
Yeah, it's like snapping your. I get my clients to do the same thing, to revisit the abuse in journaling it, because it becomes almost like an alcoholic ringing their sponsor, so to speak, and just snapping themselves out of that craving where they're minimizing the abuse and how bad it was. You've got to see it and just snap yourself back into reality, in so to speak.
Right. And I think one of the analogies I use often is, especially when it comes to children, because I'll have protective mothers say, but the kids love him and he's a wonderful dad and he's done so many things. And then my question is, if you can think about all of the ways that he hasn't been a good dad or she hasn't been a good dad, and then ask yourself, if all of those incidences, instead of being these covert, maybe verbal, assaults, or even just minimizing somebody, right? And you were to actually make them a fist, would you think it was abuse? Because it really is death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's change it a little bit. Let's say that, he told your child that, your mother's lazy and her job is dumb and it'll never amount to anything. Right there, those are 3 punches to the face. Is it abuse
Yeah.
now? Because it is. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It's so insidious, isn't it? And I love that analogy. I spoke to a detective who was a guest on my podcast last week, the week before, and he kind of told me about another analogy, which is the same, where they're acknowledging coercive control now. And he said they would go out and the victim would tell them, well, he shifted my keys. And normally a police officer would go, oh, really? So that's why you're calling us out? Oh, but no, that led me to not be able to start my car. And that led me to not be able to get to work. And that led me to lose my job and lose my money. So shifting the keys had this huge flow-on effect. And, this is how it starts, with these things that don't seem that big, that are intentional.
Right. Very much intentional. And it's such a slow grooming process, right? That you get used to it, right? The boundaries just continue to shift and shift and shift. These people wouldn't choose someone who would, be pushing back a lot. Not that victims are weak. Victims are actually extremely resilient and strong, but victims also just are trying to be kind-hearted people. I mean, honestly, I think if the world were made of more of the types of people who get harmed in these relationships, we'd have a world with pretty nice people.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're certainly not chosen for your weakness. And I hate it when people think that they're weak and that's stupid. How could I fall for that? Well, we fell for it. Anyone can. It doesn't.
And the codependency word, right? Oh my gosh, that drives me crazy. Self-esteem and codependency. The goal of the abuser is to make someone dependent upon them, but that doesn't mean the victim started off codependent, number one. And number two, I mean, certainly, again, how is it, let's just ask this question. How is it that grown men in prisoner of war camps can acquiesce and eventually align with their oppressors? Are they weak?
No. Yeah. That's a great visualization to have. I think we've all seen those clips of people in Auschwitz and other war camps. It's horrific, but this is the nature of trauma bonding, isn't it? You don't choose to be addicted. You don't choose to have this dependency on your abuser.
No. It's how they set up. It's been a plan all along. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just for everyone listening, I just want to reiterate that it doesn't matter how many letters we have after our name. I know Dr. Christine is not only a beautiful victim herself, but she's also a professional with so many letters after her name. We could play a game of Scrabble with them. And that's just an indication that it can happen, as Christine said earlier, it can happen to anyone because it happens under the level of awareness. So, Christine, tell us about a big thing for my clients is going to court with their abuser and all of the the grooming and the manipulation that goes into alienating the children from them, but also a system that doesn't understand coercive control and narcissistic abuse. And, our clients just think that the narcissist is going to fool them too. Like, how do you support that client, and what do you have to say about our systems?
So it's systemic oppression. It's systemic coercive control. I think a lot of people in the systems, we know this from research. A lot of the people we'll say judges, court professionals, lawyers, believe in the hierarchy of society. That's research affirms that. So they believe that there are people who are supposed to be in positions of power. And in that, think about who has a lot of power in society: judges, right? And these judges actually believe that mothers make up stories. They actually believe that children belong with equitable time with either parent, regardless of circumstances. Yeah. And so this is I think what it becomes, right? The court becomes the abuser's playground. It gives them another opportunity to inflict harm. And when they show up as charlatans, as we know, the pathology of abusers is not to be, oh my gosh, I'm an abuser. They don't hold a sign saying I'm an abuser,
No,
right?
it's not a sticker they slap on their forehead, is it? And say, hey,
No,
I'm coming.
no. So, and they oftentimes silence victims. So even if you're a victim, it's not like you run down the street and tell the next woman or man that they're going to be a victim, right? Because there's a lot of smear campaign and things like that going on. So the court system just literally emboldens the abuser, gives them more power. I mean, the fact that these abusers can go back to court multiple times on silly contempt that don't even mean a thing is an example of vexatious litigation and an example of a court system that doesn't seem to care. Yeah.
Absolutely. I hear of this, litigation, post-separation abuse that is just horrific, and it seems to favour the abuser. We've got to give them their due process. We've got to give them their chance, and it uses, the court's time, the court's money, and it extends the violence for the abusee, the victim, who's trying to go no contact. And there just seems to be no understanding. It's all about being fair to the parents.
Exactly. And I'm appreciative of the fact that in Australia now you're recognizing coercive control and criminalized, right? In Australia,
Well,
so this
in Queensland, New South Wales, definitely.
Exactly.
I'm not sure about the other states yet, but
right. So it's coming, which is really good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's coming down the pike, which is wonderful. But the reality is that, there's a lot of people who don't even understand what coercive control is. They just think it's a new word that we're throwing around. And really, it's important for all of us to elevate the vernacular that coercive control is, and maybe your listeners don't know, but I worked under the tutelage of Dr. Evan Stark in getting my doctorate degree. He actually lived 40 minutes away from me, which was just an amazing thing. But he was on my committee. And the reality is that coercive control is the underpinning of all abuse. It is about coercion and control, and so it's not necessarily looking through the violent incident model. It can be, but that the systems are often complicit in this process, and they're not working to protect children. And so when mothers come and they come forward and say, I was an abuse victim, they're disbelieved at almost actually over 50% of the time. They're disbelieved for their own abuse.
Yeah, or they're punished for the residual effects, aren't they, of the abuse, because, of course they've got anxiety and depression and all of these things. They've been abused. So then, the court looks at the abuse and goes, you're right. They are a bit, crazy, like you said.
Unhinged. Right? And I always say when people ask me, how can you tell the difference between an abuser and the victim? Well, a victim will often apologize when they behave in an unhinged way. They're often filled with shame and regret.
Yeah.
And we also need to ask ourselves, and I actually have a training program where I train clinicians, attorneys, and coaches on what the signs are, how to look for all of what happened from coercive control from soup to nuts. But the bottom line is that, victims and survivors, we can ask ourselves, who is this person outside of that relationship?
Dynamic. Yeah. I think it's really important that there's people like you to talk to lawyers and the judicial system. I speak regularly with the Queensland Law Society here about that, telling the difference between a victim and an abuser. And as you said, the victim will be the one who's experiencing remorse. But with a lawyer, they'll also be the one that's saying, I just want it to be all over. I want this done, and giving up their rights or their future, entitlements, whereas the abuser will be going, no, sorry, can't give you that information, or, ignoring subpoenas, whereas the victim will be handing over everything. And, that's just the start before they even get to court.
So true.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's torture. So we know that that's what feminists in the 1970s, did call it intimate terrorism. It's psychological warfare. And it really is so impactful. Of course, it's going to create, as you said, dysregulation, and all of these other manifestations of trauma are going to come out. Yet we expect these people to show up to court calm, even though they have to sit right next to their abuser sometimes, or certainly within proximity. And their children are coming home very dysregulated and overwhelmed, yet they're not supposed to be upset about this. Their children may be aligned with the abuser and they're not supposed to be upset. I mean, the whole thing makes absolutely no sense to me. It's like, it's not hard here. This is not rocket science, people. Come on.
It really doesn't. And Kristen, I don't know what you call them over in the States, but I've been getting really frustrated with this myself just lately, with people that hold all the power. Now, I just did a post on, we call them family reports here, and I know you would have the equivalent if you don't call that, but that's, I guess, the social worker or the psychologist who goes and interviews mum, then dad with the kids, then mum with the kids, and dad with the new girlfriend, mum with the new whatever. And they hold so much power, and because they're writing the report. And if they don't understand coercive control, because the court apparently is very reluctant to challenge their expert finding, and if their report does not reflect an understanding, then they're going to support the abuser, aren't they? And children fear the abuser and betraying, in inverted commas, them rather than the victim parents. So, it's them and mediators, once again, even before we get to the judge, who set victims up for failure, children up for more abuse. Yeah.
Absolutely. What I keep finding over and over again is that, and I've actually done the guardian ad litem. We call them guardian ad litems or forensic evaluators or custody I mean, there's a variety of different positions. Some people are doing custody evaluations. Some of them are guardian ad litems or minors counsel. There's a lot of players, and maybe we should call them actors, because they're going in there and they don't necessarily want the best interests of the children. What keeps on happening, I keep seeing it with my clients, is they'll pay lots of money for this evaluation. And the person might meet with the child 1 or 2 times for a short period of time. And if the child's afraid, that doesn't seem to be relevant. And 50-50 custody tends to be the answer, which is really inappropriate, especially to your point. You started off by saying, like, who's looking at this relationship? Like, if you look at a parental subsystem, 2 people, a husband and a wife, or even if they're not married, or a woman and it doesn't matter. If you look at 2 people together who are quote unquote basically the solidify the family system.
Yeah.
What is their relationship dynamic? Because if there's been one person exerting power and control over another person, we have to assume that person is exerting power and control over the children. So the children might lie and say their dad is not an abuser, or they might be really afraid, reasonably so, right? And so, or they may not go with the protective parent purposefully because they're afraid of the ramifications. And so this is happening all the time, where children are forced into repair therapy with an abuser. I mean, this just makes no sense to me.
I know. Or they've witnessed the residual effects of the victim's abuse. Let's just say it's mum. Mum's crying all the time. She's sad all the time. It's not nice to go to mum's because she's so sad all the time. So they want to go up the other, let's just say, Disneyland parent, because and also, that other parent is gaslighting the children into believing there's something wrong, with mum. So they may go to the abusive parent for that reason. But also another reason that I believe they may go to the abusive parent is because they've been conditioned to just play and do jigsaws when dad's is screaming and yelling. It's just so normal for them. They don't even, bat an eyelid when that parent is abusing the other parent, because it is their normal, their baseline for normal.
Sure. And sometimes even, like you said, this abusive parent may not even be overtly abusive, right?
Yeah.
They just might seem like a normal person, and the only one who's dysregulated is the person who's getting gaslit all the time.
The victim. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
the abuser will, get the children away from that parent because they've set them up to react, and then they become the hero. And it's just so convoluted. So getting back to family court, tell us about some of the experiences of your clients and the frustrations they've experienced in dealing with a system that does not get it.
Yeah, every time I get on a call with a protective parent and they're like, they're from Ohio, or they're from, I don't know, Dubai, and they're like, it's just so horrible here. And I'm like, it's horrible everywhere. That's what everybody needs to be aware of, is that if it's horrible where you are, just know that it's horrible everywhere. Family court judges have judicial immunity. It was written into law in 1607, where they actually, as long as they do not behave, they do not go outside the parameters of their position. There's 2 clauses. Even if they act with malicious intent, they cannot be held liable. And so that's the system we're dealing with. So I have moms who pay lots of money for a custody evaluator. The children are petrified to go with the abusive parent. The abusive parent, there is no doubt there's abuse, and and the children are forced, because the evaluator decides 50-50 is in the best interest of the children. This is the big problem. And you can get me, I will go off now on this because this is my area, right? The children.
Yes.
Anybody who thinks that children need 2 parents is wrong. Children need one healthy parent. I always say the best case scenario for these children is that their abusive parent discards them, just like they discard the adult victim. Now, that's a horrifying experience for a child. And as a protective parent, what you're going to have to do is help your child deal with that abandonment, that loss, that feeling of rejection. But that is a best case scenario. And the courts do not see that as a best case scenario.
Yeah.
And so that's the most heartbreaking, is that the courts and people aren't acknowledging how the brain actually changes in children. It changes in adults. It changes in children when they are being forced to regulate their behavior every single day whenever they're around an abuser. And then oftentimes what these abusers do, most of the time, is the child knows that abuser does not love them unconditionally. The only way the abuser loves them is if they do what the abuser tells them to do, right? Whether it's overt or covert. You should hate your mother, or whatever it is, right? You should, you don't really like your mother's boyfriend, whatever it is. And then when the child comes home to that protective parent, you understand that now that love also feels conditional. Because now the abuser has maliciously been attempting to fracture that attachment between the protective parent and that child. And so there's a child, I call it like they're out to sea, and they have no anchor tethering them at all. They feel lost. And then add in that protective parents are usually very, of course, their own trauma victims, dysregulated sometimes, reactive, maybe angry with their child for being disrespectful, or angry that their child even wants to go with the abuser. And so they're behaving in all these ways, and all they're doing actually is making the child actually more compromised.
Yeah, and supporting what the abusive parent is telling their child, which is, not a very clinical term here, Christine, but they're nuts, and it supports that, what they're telling the children, and the child goes, but I know narcissistic abuse is not gender specific, but just for ease, I'm just going to say dad and mum, okay? But the child is going, wow, dad's right. mum is nuts because she's doing all of these things, but she's being set up like a chess player to do this, and the child is just as abused as the parent. But as we know, they're just collateral damage. There's no care factor for them in punishing the
Yeah,
other parent.
I wrote down something you wrote in the book. You say something about set up and destroy. Yeah, like, it's the provoke and record, or the provoke and destroy. Like, how do I make her seem unstable? And
Yeah.
so in the case, in what we're talking about, her gender, female gender, but how do I make that person seem unstable? And when you've lost your children or feel like you're losing your children, instability is par for course.
Yeah. Don't take that comes away from a mama bear especially if she's not abusive and she loves those cubs. But that's the abuser knows that's the chink in their armor. That is the most important thing in their life, and that's what they're going to go for. Have you got any more stories, Christine, for us of people perhaps that have managed to make some leeway in getting, I guess, decisions overturned, or, getting the court to recognize what this is going on for them? Because coercive control is not just stopping you from having social media, choosing your clothes, needing to pick you up every day and stalking you. It's all those insidious things that, go along with those things. So, tell us about some of those cases.
Yeah, so I would just say, I think that one of the things that's important to do in these particular situations is to really strategize. And that's the whole, when we started the conversation earlier, is like, if you can radically accept who this person is, now, guess who knows that? Guess who knows that abuser better than anyone? You do.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can really use that to your advantage in family court and other situations. You can, again, I go back to the 3 Ps. You can predict what this person's what matters most to this person. Is it the money? Is it not having to pay child support? Is it they know the children matter more to you than anything, so they're going to try to take more custodial time? What could you negotiate that they think hurts you a lot? Like, for example, I'll use child support, right? Everybody, I know people need child support. I know it's so challenging. The reality is you can have an agreement that says you're going to get paid X amount of dollars in child support, and that abuser may never, ever pay it. So when women, or I shouldn't say women, when anybody goes to court and fights for child support in these abusive situations, I mean, I say, okay, great. But if you're going to keep fighting for this, know that there's a chance that once the agreement's in place, you're going to have to go back to court to try to get it anyway. And most abusers do not go to jail right away for not paying child support. It takes a long time for that to become it takes a long time for that to become something that actually they get held accountable on.
Yeah. And
so how do you figure out what matters to them, and how could you give them what matters to them in a way that is not giving yourself up, because it's empowering for you to actually win at the chess game. That's the key, right?
Yeah. If they think the abuser thinks they're having this little win, let them. You can go away and have a bit of a cough because you had to send a smiley face at the end of the text. But if they've got something that you want, in the end of the day, you can't ask nicely. So you sometimes it does fly in the face of your integrity. Just with I'm so glad you brought that up, Christine. Child support. I found that this is, once again, just another extension so much of the time of the domestic violence, because the victim who has been abused, has no energy to get out of bed some days, has to then try and get child support so they can support their children. And they go to the system, and the child support system goes, well, get us some evidence. Well, how do you want me to do that? You know, I've been financially abused for 20 years. Well, sorry, I can't help you. So they're being made to find the evidence when they're a victim and that they're rock bottom. And yeah, it just feeds into it because victims give up.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so abusers know that there's not going to be accountability through the court system, right?
Yeah.
And so then again, which fight is really worth fighting? I always say, there's a way to figure out more time with your children and less money, I know we would all live out of a shoebox if we had to have more time. And frankly, that's what it sometimes comes down to. And I'm not suggesting this is easy, and I am not judging anyone who's decided not to do this. I'm just saying I want every protective parent out there to realize that when the abuser doesn't show up, let's just say until 5 o'clock, and visitation was supposed to start at 3, that's a win for the child. Because that child has now spent 2 extra hours with you. I have a mom who the child, every day, he makes the child come to visits. It's the summer, right? It's school vacation here in many places in the States, or just about over here in the States. Makes the child go for the custodial time, even though he's working all day. I'm like, that's a win. That's a win. He's not home. And so the more that we can ensure that our children are not engaged with the abuser, the better. This mom's frustrated. She's like, how come he's working and the child's there? I'm like, no, this is good. And so how do we capitalize on that time with our children? The abuser says, I can't take her this weekend because I have someplace to be. You could be angry about that, or just be, okay, all right, I'll pick her up at 2 and get your child. And I know it's a lot of work. I want to recognize that this is exhausting work. These children are very dysregulated. They are suffering an unacknowledged child abuse. No one recognizes it. I promise you they are being abused. It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. And in that, when they're with you, I know it's hard, but I also know that you can do the work.
Yeah. So, if for those members of, the judicial system, judges, prosecutors, defenders, social workers, mediators, family report writers, guardian ad litems, if you are listening to this, it's got to be about the child. And what is fair for the parents is not what's fair for the child all the time. And a manipulative abuser is not going to have a sign on their forehead. And you have to look, back, and you have to really understand the dynamics of coercive control. If your goal really is to make the child's needs paramount in these custody disputes. But I totally agree with you, Christine. It's about also not giving them a reaction, which is going to hurt the children more, because they want you to go, you can't do this to me. I've got a life and you need to give me some time. They don't care. And they're thrilled with your reactions. So, we've just got to work with what we've got, don't we? But the ultimate goal is to fix the system so that they have absolutely limited time or supervised time with that abusive parent.
That would be the miracle.
It would be the miracle, So, Christine, you are also an author. And I'm so excited about your up-and-coming project. So please tell all the listeners out here today about your book.
Absolutely. So my colleague and I, Amy Polacko, wrote a book, Framed: Women in the Family Court Underworld. And this book, I'm excited that you've invited us back on to talk a little bit more about it, but the book details 22 stories of protective mothers and their experiences living through the family court. Some of these mothers have experienced estrangement by their children. Some of these mothers have been accused of alienation. Some of these mothers, their children have been forced into repair therapy. Some mothers have been forced to share custody with sexual predators. The stories are, it's a must read, a very difficult read, but a must read. It's available for pre-order right now. And we are looking for people to leave us Goodreads reviews because that helps it. It was actually for a short period of time, #1 in divorce and separation. And we were so excited.
It hasn't even been released yet, and it's already #1.
No, I know. So we really want to keep the momentum. We're so excited. And I did want to let your listeners know also about my protective parenting program, which is a program specifically made from a therapeutic attachment perspective for protective parents, because you guys are doing the hardest work there is. And there is a different way of parenting. We have to parent these children differently. And in any case, I believe we can end the intergenerational trauma with us, that we can actually parent differently, and our kids will not take on the traits of the abuser long term. Some kids do that. Will not be so disassociated that they're fawning along with everyone in their life and maybe engaging in an unhealthy relationship, right? And will not be in this frozen state where they just literally are not inclined to engage in society, filled with social anxiety. Many of these children have significant anxiety and they devalue themselves because the abuser, of course, doesn't love them in a valuable way, in a healthy way.
Yeah. Oh gosh. So please pre-order your book, guys. It's called Framed, Women in the Family Court Underworld, and that kind of just says it all, doesn't it? The underworld, around how there's just no support there, and no one who gets it, and the wrong people are being abused, and the abusers are being rewarded. So anyway, Christine, look, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me here. I have enjoyed this so much. Everyone who's listening, Christine's course is for everyone in Australia too, and her course is amazing. So just reach out. Her website link will be in the comments on the podcast. But just wanted to say thank you so much, and I can't wait for you and Amy, the co-author of Framed, to come along next week and chat with me in depth about your book.
Awesome. We will come back with excerpts so that people can hear little pieces of the stories, for sure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Perfect. All right, Christine, thank you.
And that brings us to the end of another Fake Love and Flying Monkeys episode. I really hope you found this episode, which I was lucky enough to have an amazing discussion with the brilliant and beautiful Dr. Christine Cocchiola around coercive control and her passion in helping victims and changing the system. I really hope you found it as insightful, eye-opening, and bewildering in a lot of instances, as I truly did. Now, if you'd like to have a one-on-one counseling session with me, no matter where you are in the world, all my sessions are online, and I have a special offer going at the moment. Just go to my website, mention this podcast when you send me your email, and you will receive a 10% discount. You just have to mention that you watched this episode, and I would love to be able to support you one-on-one in your healing journey. And of course, guys, don't forget to get your copy of my best-selling book, Fake Love, Understanding and Healing from Narcissistic Abuse. On that note, it's bye from me for now. Until the next episode, remember, you are worthy of love, and you are worthy of so much more than a lifetime of fake love and flying monkeys.